Hey everybody, I'm Logan Alec. I'm a CPA. Today I'm going over the no tax on tips provision in the one big beautiful bill. I do have a little spreadsheet here to kind of just go over a basic example for you. But first, let's talk about some basics here. Okay. Um, so the deduction is up to $25,000. Okay, and it's on qualified tips. All right. That's an important term to know because it is defined down here. Qualified tips. For purposes of this section, the term qualified tips means cash tips, and that includes charge tips too. It's not just literally tips paid in cash, and it does include tips received in the course of like a tip sharing arrangement, right? Like with a bunch of workers on the same shift or something. Received by an individual. Now get this: in an occupation which customarily and regularly receive tips on or before December 31st, 2024, as provided by the secretary. Okay, so it's only certain occupations that the Treasury Department believes workers in which workers customarily and regularly receive tips. Well, what are these occupations? Well, check this out. Let's scroll to the bottom here. Here, check this out. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, which was on July 4th, the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary's delegate shall publish a list of occupations which customarily and regularly receive tips on or before December 31st, 2024 for these purposes. Okay? So, right. So there's going to be a list of occupations. Now, obviously, if you're an occupation that everybody knows gets tipped, right? Restaurant workers, taxi or rideshare folks, hair and beauty care, right? Obviously, right? But, there's a lot of talk out there of like, folks in industries that typically don't get tips. Well, I'm going to change my whole fee structure to a tip. Well, that's not going to work. Okay, that's not going to work. So I just want to mention that. Now, another thing about these tips is they have to be reported on a 1099 NEC, a 1099K, or a W-2. Okay? Because of this section here. There shall be allowed as a deduction an amount equal to the qualified tips, we just talked about what qualified tips are, received during the taxable year that are included on statements furnished to the individual pursuant to these code sections, right? Which is basically, 1099K, 1099 NEC, and W-2. Right, or reported by you, the taxpayer, on Form 4137, which is the form where you report tips your employer doesn't know about. Okay, if you are an honest tip receiver and do that. Right, so the max deduction is $25,000. Now, check this out. Here's the phase out. Okay, it's a high phase out. The deduction gets reduced after you start making $150,000 a single, or any filing status other than married filing jointly, for which the phase out begins at $300,000 of adjusted gross income or modified adjusted gross income. And for purposes of this code section, as we're seeing a lot in the big beautiful bill, modified adjusted gross income is simply your adjusted gross income without respect to the income exclusions for foreign earned income and territorial earned income. Right, and there's a wide phase out range here, right? So it's reduced by $100 for each $1,000 by which your magi exceeds these amounts, right? So let's say you make $30,000 in tips during the year, right? If this income limitations weren't here, you could deduct the full $25,000. But let's say you made 150. Let's say you're single and your modified AGI is $151,000, right? What happens? Well, you can only deduct $24,900 now, right? And so on and so forth. Right, you see how that works? Because it's reduced by $100 for each $1,000 by which your AGI or modified AGI exceeds these amounts, right? So basically 10 cents on the dollar reduction. But it's grouped by thousands. Okay, so when is this effective? This is effective for tax years 2025 through 2028. Okay, 2025 through 2028. Why 2028? Well, because that's the last year of Trump's presidency, right? Or the last full year anyway. Obviously, and of course, I'm assuming that he runs his full term, right? Obviously, running his full term, he'd be president for a couple weeks at the beginning of January 2029, but 2028 is his last full year of president, assuming he serves his full second term here. Tips received in course of trade business. This is basically just saying that your tip deduction is essentially limited to your net business income. Okay. When I was talking about qualified tips, this is an important part too that I didn't go over. So let's go back to what is a qualified tip. Okay, such terms shall not include any amount received by an individual unless such amount, so this is what qualified tips also have to be these things. The amount is paid voluntarily by the customer without any consequence in the event of non-payment, right? That means, it's not a mandatory, so like a mandatory service charge or something. That doesn't count for these purposes, okay? It's a voluntary payment without any consequence in the event of non-payment. It's not the subject of negotiation, right? It is simply what the customer deems is appropriate for the service provided and is determined by the payer, right? So again, a service charge, a mandatory gratuity, things like that would not count for these purposes. Okay, it has to be a true tip, if that makes sense. Okay, I think that's enough legalese. Let's just do an example here. Let's go back to my thing here. Okay. All right. So here's a little example. Okay. Let's say you're a restaurant worker. You make $42,000 dollars a year. Okay. That's big, and the majority of that, let's say, is from tips, right? Your non-tip income, let's say, is 12, but your tip income is 30. Both is reported under W-2. Your AGI is going to be $42,000. Under the old law, pre-big beautiful bill, you get a $15,000 standard deduction, taxable income of $27,000. Your regular income tax liability before credits would be about $3,000. Okay. Under the new law, right? Non-tip, non-overtime, same income amounts earned, but the one big beautiful bill increases standard deduction amounts a little bit for everybody. In this case for single people by $750. Not a lot, but it's something. But you'd also get this $25,000 tip deduction. I mean, your taxable income is only like $1,250, and so your regular income tax liability is only $125. Right? So this person is saving like $3,000. Right? That's pretty sweet. Because they aren't subject to the phase outs or anything. And plus, you're getting the maximum tip deduction. Now, I think I covered all this, but one thing to note. Now, this is like a W-2 person's example. Okay? W-2. One thing to note is that the tips deduction, look where it shows up. It's a below the line deduction. It doesn't reduce AGI, but it does reduce taxable income. Okay? So that means if you're like a Schedule C person, like let's say like an Uber driver or something, or a Schedule C, right, tip earner, this tips deduction does not reduce your Schedule C business income or your self-employment tax for that matter, right? It doesn't reduce that. Okay, this tip deduction does not appear on your Schedule C. It's simply a below the line deduction here, kind of similar, kind of in the same neighborhood, let's say, as a standard deduction. Okay, so I just want to point that out. Anyway, folks, this is obviously a boon for folks who make a lot in tips. Especially W-2 folks who make a lot in tips, and the majority of their income in tips. I think I covered the basics of it. There's still a few questions out there that I think Treasury has to provide guidance on, for example, the list of occupations and things like that. But what I want to know, what do you think about this deduction, right? Is it kind of not fair, right? Because it's kind of just rewarding a certain type of income that's earned, tip income. And if you happen to be in an industry where you make most of your money in tips, you're getting a huge boon here. Well, the rest of us who, aren't, like accountants, we're not in industries or office workers or, people like that who aren't typically in tip businesses or trades or, work. Is it not fair to us? I'd like to know, y'all's opinions on this. And also, I have some other videos about the one big beautiful bill here on the left-hand side of the screen for your education and enjoyment. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.